In the winter of 1944, as Allied forces pressed deeper into the heart of Nazi Germany and across the Pacific Islands, something began stalking them through the fog of war. Not enemy soldiers, not weapons they recognized, something else entirely. The official records speak of weather, terrain, and tactical objectives. They document casualties, ammunition expenditures, and strategic victories. What they don't record are the reports that came flooding in from reconnaissance patrols across multiple theaters of operation. Reports of encounters so disturbing that they were immediately classified and buried in files marked "Do Not Discuss." These weren't isolated incidents. From the frozen forests of the Ardennes to the steaming jungles of the Pacific, experienced combat veterans were reporting sightings that defied explanation. Tall figures moving through tree lines with impossible silence. Lights beneath ocean waters that cast no reflection. Families in bombed-out buildings who spoke with voices that belonged to the dead. Military censors worked overtime to suppress these accounts. Soldiers were transferred, separated, and ordered to never discuss what they had seen. But some records survived. Some witnesses lived to tell their stories decades later. And what they describe challenges everything we thought we knew about World War II. Tonight, we examine 3 declassified incidents from 1944 that suggest Allied forces encountered something far more sinister than conventional warfare. These are the testimonies of men who served with distinction, whose credibility was never questioned in any other context. Yet their accounts describe experiences that military historians have struggled to categorize or explain for over 70 years. The fog of war conceals many secrets. Some involve strategy, some politics, some the darkest aspects of human nature. But others suggest that in humanity's darkest hour, something was watching from the shadows. Something that left footprints in the snow, voices on radio transmissions, and questions that persist to this day. If you're drawn to these forgotten accounts from the darkest chapters of military history, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the classified files and untold stories that shaped our world. Now let's step into the fog of war and examine what really happened in those winter months of 1944. November 1944. The Hürgen forest stretched across the German border like a wound in the earth, its trees stripped bare by months of artillery bombardment. What had once been a dense woodland was now a nightmare landscape of splintered stumps, frozen mud, and deadly silence broken only by the distant rumble of guns. The 28th Infantry Division had been grinding through this hellscape for weeks, advancing yard by bloody yard against determined German resistance. It was some of the most brutal fighting of the European theater, made worse by temperatures that regularly dropped below freezing and visibility that rarely exceeded 50 yards through the skeletal remains of the forest. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen had survived the Normandy landings, the breakout from St. Vith, and 3 months of continuous combat. He commanded a 5-man reconnaissance patrol tasked with locating German observation posts that Allied intelligence believed were directing artillery fire from deep within the forest. It was dangerous work, requiring small teams to move far ahead of friendly lines into territory that could conceal enemy positions at every turn. But what Chen's patrol encountered on November 15th had nothing to do with German soldiers or artillery observers. It would be documented in classified intelligence reports that wouldn't surface until a Freedom of Information Act request in 1987 forced their declassification. Reports that military historians still struggle to explain. From the declassified personal diary of Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, 28th Infantry Division. Day 12 in this god-forsaken forest. Temperature dropped to maybe 10 degrees last night. Johnson's got trench foot bad, but he won't report it. None of us want to leave the others, not in this place. Found something today that doesn't make any sense. We were moving through a clearing, maybe 200 yards across, when Rodriguez spots movement in the tree line ahead. Not German movement. Something else entirely. These shapes may be 8 feet tall, moving between the trees but never stepping into the open. Always just at the edge of vision, like they knew exactly how far they could go without being clearly seen. Williams said they looked like men in long coats, but men don't move like that. Silent, perfectly coordinated. Like they were following our patrol but staying just out of rifle range, matching our pace exactly. We set up an ambush position and waited 3 hours. Temperature was dropping fast, and we couldn't feel our fingers on the trigger guards. Nothing. Absolute silence except for the wind through those dead branches. But when we finally moved out, there they were again. Following. Always following. The worst part came when we radioed back to Lieutenant Morrison for extraction coordinates. He told us 2 other patrols had reported the exact same thing. Same height description, same behavior, same impossible silence. Command had ordered all units not to discuss these sightings with other companies. They were calling it combat stress reaction in the official logs. Military records from the 28th Infantry Division confirm that between November 15th and November 30th, 1944, 7 different reconnaissance patrols from 3 separate companies filed reports describing encounters with unidentified figures in the Hurtgen Forest sector. Each report described tall, humanoid shapes that appeared to track Allied movements while maintaining a consistent distance of approximately 100 to 200 yards. What makes these accounts particularly unsettling is their consistency across units that had no contact with each other. Soldiers operating in different grid squares under different company commands provided nearly identical descriptions of height, movement patterns, and behavior. All reported that the figures appeared most frequently during periods of heavy fog or during the twilight hours just before dawn. The Hurtgen Forest in winter 1944 was already a landscape designed to break men's minds. Temperatures that turned weapon oil to sludge and made metal too cold to touch with bare skin. Artillery barrages that could come without warning from invisible German positions. The constant awareness that enemy snipers could be concealed behind any of the thousands of splintered tree trunks that dotted the frozen ground. In this environment of heightened survival awareness, where a misidentified shadow could mean death, experienced infantry soldiers were reporting something that defied every tactical manual they had ever studied. These weren't green recruits jumping at shadows. These were battle-hardened veterans who had learned to distinguish between wind-blown debris and enemy movement, between the sound of settling timber and approaching footsteps. Chen's patrol would have their closest encounter on November 23rd while establishing a night observation post to monitor a suspected German supply route. According to his diary entry from that night, multiple figures approached their position in perfect silence, moving through terrain that should have made quiet movement impossible. "We had them dead to rights," Chen wrote in an entry he wouldn't show to military censors until decades after the war. 5 M1 rifles, trained on the nearest figure. Williams was about to challenge them according to standard procedure when they just dissolved, like fog touched by morning sun. Gone in seconds, no sound of retreat, no disturbance of the brush where they had been standing. But we found the tracks in the snow the next morning, bare feet, human-sized but somehow wrong, too narrow, too deep, like whatever made them was both lighter and heavier than it should have been. Bare feet in November, snow in Germany. We took photographs with Williams' camera, documented the depth and spacing. Intelligence officers confiscated everything 2 days later. The 28th Infantry Division was pulled from the Hurtgen Forest on December 1st, 1944, officially for rest and refit after sustaining heavy casualties. Unofficially, intelligence reports suggest growing concern about unit morale and what officers termed persistent reports of anomalous contacts. Chen's patrol was disbanded, its members reassigned to different units across the European theater. The photographs of the tracks were confiscated by military intelligence and never returned. When Chen requested copies through official channels in 1946, he was told no such photographs existed in division files. Whether the Watchers of Hürten Forest were products of extreme combat stress, some form of German psychological warfare, or something else entirely remains an open question. What's documented in military records is that multiple trained observers, operating under conditions of extreme stress but with proven reliability in other combat situations, reported encounters that followed consistent patterns over a 2-week period. Their testimonies never wavered, even decades after the war ended. Sometimes the most disturbing military investigations begin not with what happened, but with what was left behind. On December 10, 1944, the USS Fletcher received an emergency transmission from Marine Forward Operating Base Able, established 3 days earlier on the remote Pacific island of Palawan. The message was brief: request immediate evacuation, all personnel, urgent. Then silence. When the Fletcher reached the coordinates 18 hours later, they found the base exactly as the radio message had suggested it would be, completely abandoned but mysteriously intact. 43 Marines had vanished from a secure beachhead position, leaving behind loaded weapons, functioning equipment, and meals that were still warm in their mess kits. The investigation that followed would uncover details that challenged everything the Navy thought they understood about Pacific Island operations. From the official report filed by Major James Patterson, the Marine Corps investigating officer dispatched from Guadalcanal, physical evidence suggests the evacuation occurred between 2100 and 2300 hours on December 8th. No signs of struggle, hostile action, or enemy contact. Personal effects remain undisturbed in individual tents. Cooking fires were properly extinguished, indicating organized departure rather than emergency evacuation under fire. However, several anomalies require official notation. Guard positions show evidence of abandonment while still manned. Cigarettes half-smoked at sentry posts, weapons left in ready positions with safeties disengaged. Most significantly, all chronometers in the base camp show identical stopped time, 22:47 hours. Working backwards through the evidence, investigators discovered that the last confirmed radio contact had come from Corporal Danny Morrison, the base communications specialist, at 22:30. Able base to Fletcher Control. We're seeing lights in the water approximately 200 yards offshore. Multiple contacts approaching from seaward. Repeat, multiple contacts. They're Fletcher Control, they're not boats. Requesting immediate fire support. The radio log shows that Morrison's transmission was interrupted mid-sentence. What the investigation team discovered later was that 2 other marine installations, on islands over 50 miles apart, had recorded nearly identical radio transmissions at exactly 22:47. The same time shown on all the stopped chronometers at Base Able. Initially, investigators attributed the timing correlation to equipment malfunction or atmospheric interference, common in the Pacific Theater. This theory was abandoned when technicians confirmed that all radio equipment at all 3 bases was functioning normally and had been properly maintained according to Marine Corps standards. December in the Central Pacific meant monsoon season. Constant rain, oppressive humidity, and seas rough enough to make small boat operations extremely dangerous. The investigating team battled these conditions as they methodically documented the abandoned base, searching for any clue that might explain how 43 Marines could simply disappear from a fortified position. Palawan Island held no strategic value, no airstrip, no harbor suitable for major vessels, no known enemy presence. It was simply a way station for Marine forces moving north toward the Japanese home islands, chosen precisely because its isolation made it secure from enemy interference. That isolation also made the disappearance more puzzling. Naval intelligence confirmed no Japanese ships had been detected within 200 miles of Palawan in the week before the incident. No aircraft activity had been recorded by radar stations. Weather conditions would have made any waterborne assault virtually suicidal. From the personal journal of Navy Lieutenant Commander Robert Hayes, the Fletcher's executive officer and senior investigator, the more evidence we collected, the less sense any of it made. Marines don't abandon defensive positions without direct orders from commanding officers. They certainly don't leave loaded weapons behind in a potential combat zone. These weren't inexperienced troops. Base Able was staffed with veterans of Guadalcanal and Tarawa, men who had proven their reliability under the worst possible conditions. But 43 men don't simply vanish into thin air either. We found one final piece of evidence on December 12th, while Petty Officer Collins was securing the radio equipment for transport back to the Fletcher. Hidden under Morrison's transmission log was a message he had apparently started typing but never sent. "Fletcher Control, they're coming up from the water." Not enemy contacts. Something else entirely. Lights underneath the surface. The water around the base is glowing and the lights are getting brighter and... The message ended mid-sentence. The typewriter ribbon showed that Morrison had struck the keys with increasing force, as if he was having difficulty operating the machine. The final word was incomplete, trailing off into an illegible smear across the paper. The official report classified the Palawan incident as personnel missing in action, cause undetermined. Families were notified that their loved ones had been lost during combat operations in the Pacific Theater. The island was immediately abandoned and never reoccupied for the remainder of the war. In 1962, a civilian geological survey team working in the same island chain reported unusual bioluminescent activity in the waters around Palawan's coordinates. According to their research notes, the phenomenon appeared to originate from deep underwater sources and was visible from the surface during nighttime hours. Their research was classified by the Navy Department, and the survey team was reassigned to different projects in other regions. What do you think happened to those 43 Marines? Let me know your thoughts. The theories range from experimental Japanese weapons to natural phenomena that science still can't fully explain. Operation Blackout remains one of the Pacific Theater's most puzzling incidents. 43 Marines with distinguished combat records vanished without explanation from a secure position, leaving behind evidence of organized departure, but no indication of where they went or why. Their fate, like the lights that Morrison reported rising from the dark Pacific waters, remains unknown. Sometimes, the most revealing military documents are the ones that contradict each other. In the summer of 1944, as Allied forces consolidated their foothold in Nazi-occupied France, a series of routine after-action reports filed by the 82nd Airborne Division told a story of successful mop-up operations against bypassed German positions. These sanitized documents painted a picture of methodical progress and minimal resistance. The reality, according to witness accounts that wouldn't surface for 40 years, was far more disturbing. From the official 82nd Airborne Division After-Action Report, dated June 15, 1944, during consolidation operations southeast of Sainte-Mère-Église, elements of 2nd Battalion encountered intermittent resistance from bypassed enemy positions. All tactical objectives secured by 1400 hours. Unit casualties: 3 killed in action, 7 wounded in action. No unusual incidents reported during operations. The accompanying Medical Corps report for the same date noted, treated 7 enlisted personnel for minor wounds and exhaustion. Notable increase in incidents of acute stress reaction among 2nd Battalion personnel. Recommend rotation to rear areas when tactical situation permits. These routine military documents tell a remarkably different story than the one that emerged when historian Dr. Sarah Chen began interviewing D-Day veterans in the 1980s. What she discovered were testimonies that the official reports had either missed entirely or deliberately omitted. From a recorded interview with Sergeant William Dutch van der Berg, 82nd Airborne Division, conducted in 1983. Those official reports. They don't tell you about the farmhouse. We'd been moving through the hedgerow country for 3 days after the landing, mopping up German stragglers who'd been bypassed in the initial advance. Hot, dirty work, but routine for airborne operations. Then we came to this farm, maybe 2 kilometers southeast of the church at Sainte-Mère-Église. The house was completely intact, which should have been a red flag right there. The Germans had been thorough about destroying anything that might be useful to advancing Allied forces. Bridges, buildings, supply depots, anything. But this farmhouse looked like the war had never touched it. Lieutenant Barnes ordered a standard search. We'd done dozens of them by that point. What we found inside, Christ, I still wake up thinking about it sometimes, and I'm 73 years old. The official record shows that 3 other members of van der Berg's squad were interviewed by Dr. Chen over the course of her research. Their accounts, recorded separately with no communication between the veterans, show remarkable consistency in key details while differing on specifics in ways that actually support their credibility. From her interview with Private First Class Anthony Ricci, same unit. Dutch remembers some things different than I do, but we were all pretty shaken up by the whole thing. The house wasn't empty, like he says. There were people inside when we kicked in the door. French civilians, we thought at first. A family, mother, father, maybe 3 children. But something was wrong with them from the moment we saw them. The way they moved, too smooth and coordinated. The way they looked at us, like they were studying specimens rather than being surprised by armed soldiers bursting into their home. Their eyes reflected light like animals' eyes do at night, even though we were inside during daylight hours. The third witness, Corporal James McCarthy, provided perhaps the most disturbing account. Both Dutch and Tony got some of the details mixed up, but they're right about the essential facts. Something was very wrong with that family and that house. We should have called for backup immediately, but Lieutenant Barnes was eager to prove himself to the company commander. The family invited us in. Can you believe that? Spoke perfect English with American accents, which should have been impossible for French civilians in occupied territory. They offered us food, asked about the war progress like they had been following it in American newspapers rather than living under German occupation for 4 years. What makes these testimonies particularly compelling is that all 3 witnesses agree on certain key points while providing different perspectives on details that would be difficult to fabricate consistently. All remember the farmhouse as strangely intact. All describe the family as fundamentally wrong in ways they struggle to articulate even decades later. But their accounts diverge when describing what happened next in ways that suggest genuine memory rather than rehearsed story. Van der Berg insists the family simply disappeared while the soldiers were conducting their search. We split up to clear the room systematically. When we regrouped in the main room 5 minutes later, they were gone. All of them. No doors had opened, no windows, no sounds of movement. They just weren't there anymore. Ricci maintains they were never physically real to begin with. Reflections, maybe, or projections of some kind. They cast shadows on the walls, but the shadows didn't match their movements exactly. Like there was a delay between what they did and what their shadows showed. McCarthy offers the most unsettling version. They were solid enough. Barnes touched one of them, just put his hand on the father's shoulder to move him aside. But he jerked his hand back immediately, said it felt wrong, cold and yielding like wet clay. The thing looked at Barnes and smiled, but the smile was too wide for a human face. Too many teeth. Medical records from June 15th confirm that all 3 men were treated for what the field surgeon diagnosed as acute anxiety disorder and were briefly hospitalized for observation. However, their accounts of the farmhouse encounter remained consistent across 4 decades of separate interviews, with no evidence of communication between the witnesses about their testimonies. perhaps most significantly, 82nd Airborne operational maps from June 1944 show no farmhouse structure in the location all three men describe, with remarkable precision. Aerial reconnaissance photographs taken on June 10th and June 20th confirmed that no buildings existed in that grid square before, during or after their reported encounter. Were these battle-tested paratroopers experiencing collective hallucination brought on by combat stress and sleep deprivation? Were they encountering some form of German psychological warfare unknown to Allied intelligence services? Or did something happen in the Norman countryside that official reports were designed to conceal from higher command? The physical evidence is contradictory. The witness testimonies are consistent in their core elements while varying in ways that suggest authentic experience rather than fabricated accounts. The official military records acknowledge that nothing unusual occurred during routine operations. In 1994, exactly 50 years after the D-Day landings, a French farming family discovered the stone foundation of what appeared to be a house in the exact location described by the three American veterans. Archaeological investigation and carbon dating suggested the structure had been demolished sometime in the early 1940s, during the German occupation. No records exist of any building permits, demolition orders, or military actions involving that specific property during the relevant time period. The Normandy files represent a puzzle without a clear solution. Three credible witnesses describing impossible events, supported by physical evidence that shouldn't exist according to official documentation. Their testimonies never changed across 5 decades, despite the inherent impossibility of what they claim to have experienced. Sometimes the fog of war conceals not just enemy movements, but encounters that challenge our fundamental understanding of what is possible during humanity's darkest conflicts. These 3 incidents from 1944, the Watchers of Hurtgen Forest, the vanishing of Marine Base Able, and the impossible family in Normandy, share common elements that resist easy explanation. Each involved experienced military personnel whose competence and credibility had been proven under extreme conditions. Each generated official reports that minimized, ignored, or actively suppressed the anomalous aspects of what occurred. Each left behind physical evidence that investigators struggled to categorize or explain within conventional frameworks. The skeptical explanation is both reasonable and compelling. War creates perfect conditions for misidentification, collective hysteria, and false memory formation. Combat stress, sleep deprivation, and the constant threat of death can cause the human mind to perceive threats that don't exist, find meaningful patterns in random events, and remember experiences that never actually occurred. Military psychologists have documented these phenomena extensively, and veterans themselves readily acknowledge this reality. Yet these particular accounts resist dismissal as simple products of wartime trauma. The witnesses were trained military observers whose ability to accurately assess tactical situations was essential to their survival and mission success. Their credibility was never questioned in any other operational context. Most significantly, their testimonies remained consistent across decades of separate interviews, often with no contact between witnesses and no apparent motivation to maintain elaborate fabrications. Perhaps more compelling is the pattern that emerges when these incidents are viewed together. Similar reports surfaced from multiple theaters of operation throughout 1944, suggesting either widespread psychological phenomena affecting Allied forces across different continents and military branches, or encounters with something that operated beyond the boundaries of conventional warfare. Military historians face an inherent challenge when examining such accounts. Dismissing them entirely risks overlooking potentially significant intelligence about enemy capabilities or unknown phenomena. Accepting them uncritically violates the standards of evidence that govern historical research. The truth likely exists somewhere between absolute skepticism and complete acceptance. a recognition that extraordinary circumstances may produce extraordinary experiences that don't fit neatly into established categories. What remains undisputed is the human cost of these encounters, regardless of their ultimate explanation. Whether these soldiers faced supernatural phenomena, advanced enemy technology, sophisticated psychological warfare, or the products of their own traumatized minds, their experiences left lasting psychological wounds. Many carried these memories for decades, reluctant to share stories they knew would be dismissed, ridiculed, or attributed to mental instability. War strips away the comfortable certainties of civilian life, revealing both humanity's capacity for extraordinary heroism and unthinkable evil. Perhaps it also reveals phenomena that exist at the margins of human experience, aspects of reality that are normally hidden but occasionally glimpsed when the familiar structures of civilization break down under extreme stress. The fog of war conceals many secrets. Some involve military strategy, others political calculations. Still others, the darkest aspects of human nature revealed under impossible conditions. But these three incidents from 1944 suggest that Allied forces may have encountered something that operated entirely outside the framework of conventional conflict. Something that left footprints in snow, voices on radio transmissions, and questions that persist more than 70 years after the war's end. In 1944, Allied forces were fighting to save civilization from the abyss of fascism and militarism. But according to these declassified accounts, they discovered something in that darkness that suggested the abyss might have been looking back. The war ended in victory. The files were sealed, and the witnesses grew old, carrying secrets they could never fully explain or forget. But somewhere in military archives, the reports remain, waiting, watching, like the tall figures in the German forests, the lights rising from Pacific waters, and the impossible families in bombed-out buildings who smiled with too many teeth. If these forgotten accounts from the shadows of history intrigue you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the classified files and untold stories that shaped our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. Disclaimer: these stories are presented as submitted accounts and legends. Interpretations may vary. This content is for entertainment purposes and does not constitute verified historical fact. All accounts are based on declassified documents, veteran interviews, and historical research, but the supernatural elements described cannot be independently verified. Viewer discretion is advised.